Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guest for today. Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast today, our 36th podcast. I have been on a quest. Oh, I can hear you chuckling out there. A quest, you say. What's a quest? What's so special about a quest? Well, I am searching for something. Oh, stop with the eye rolling and the hums. I can see you doing that. I can see you looking at each other. Do you want to know where I'm searching? Can you raise your hands and tell me that you're interested? I see some hands out there. I see some shrugging shoulders. I see some palms up. Great. I'm going to tell you. I am searching everywhere, all around the world. I've been talking to people, and I've been visiting places. Wait a minute. People are sending me messages. The messages are coming in. Yes, you have the next question. Why? Why am I doing this? Does everyone agree that's the next question? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, everybody agrees. I am searching for the magic hook. Oh, come on, stop laughing. You're all laughing. You think this is funny? This is not funny. Do not laugh. Someone just typed, hooks can't be magic. How many of you think hooks are magic? Nobody? Nobody thinks hooks are magic? Well, you shall see as I continue, because there are different kinds of hooks, and mine is magic. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. I had so much fun doing this with a young man who has been so patient with me as we go through this process. And his name is Chip Colquhoun. Thank you so much for being with me today, Chip. I so appreciate your patience. And I had so much fun doing this. I want to tell you.
Enraptured. I was waiting for it to go on.
Well, I want to tell our listeners a little bit about you. I've been getting some correspondence from around the world, really. People who are overwhelmingly in agreement that they are struggling to keep the attention of their students. We all know how to teach our subjects, but we're having difficulty keeping the eyes and ears and minds of our students on the screen as we go through the different domains, whether it be reading or math. And I have to say that I found a hook. I found the magic hook, and I want to share it with you all, so that you can learn how to weave it into your lessons. Chip is a storyteller, and I say that as one word, storyteller. He's the author of Something Bad Has to Happen, Storytelling Skills and Creativity in the Classroom for Enhancing Educational Development. And I recommend that you check this out. He has helped the EU write a guidance on storytelling in the classroom, and he has helped teachers and train them in schools across 8 different countries. He's also written 5 family theater performances that toured the UK, and he has 3 children's books that are available. And as he says, they're available in good bookshops. In 2018, he represented the Roald Dahl's story company for ITV. And he is always getting responses from parents, but the general response is the children have been enthralled with your storytelling, and you've kept their attention in ways that I've never been able to do that. You've kept them sitting still when they had to, and you never had to tell them that they had to. His storytelling is done with insight and expertise. His storytelling is intrinsic to all humanity. It naturally differentiates. In other words, it's multimodal. It encapsulates every subject in the curriculum. So, Chip, let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here. Thank you so much again. And
thank you for the build-up as well. I can live up to the expectations.
Oh, there is not a doubt in my mind. All I have, I learned from you. And so there's not a doubt in my mind that you're going to be able to illuminate us in so many different areas. But I happen to know that your journey to stardom didn't start with becoming a storyteller. So how would you like to, I'd like to kind of talk to people about their aha moments, because very few people start out in what they're doing. So share with us a little bit about that.
Well, in a way, I didn't actually know what a storyteller was until after I became a storyteller. But the odd thing is that in a way, I was always a storyteller. I've been wanting to be a writer, definitely, since before I could write. And I mean that with sincerity. When I was about 6 years old, I found a book that I had written in at the age of probably about 2 or 3. It had to be there because it was in a box from a time when we'd moved home. And what was in this book, on the very first page, where you have like that blank page that publishers always put there for goodness knows what reason, just to homage to the trees or whatever, I had written my own little story, and it had the word "the" perfectly spelled out. It had a little picture of a fish, and then it just had a load of wavy lines. But those wavy lines had punctuation, and they were split up into paragraphs and everything. So I had genuinely had a go at writing a story, even though no one had taught me how to properly write. And all the way through my student days, my university days, even when I got my first job after graduating, I was always writing stories. I was writing plays for my friends at school to perform, my friends at college. And one of the reasons I was such a success in my first job out of uni, which was sales for a graduate recruitment firm, was because I actually took it upon myself to do copywriting for some of my clients, even though that wasn't actually a part of the job. I just love doing it.
Boy, that doesn't come together at all, sales and a dichotomy there.
But I fell into what I do now quite surprisingly, really, because I had a friend from university, or college, as you folks call it, who was training to be a teacher. And she was getting really disenchanted with her career because she had been given a placement school for training where the children were just so unruly. She couldn't keep them engaged with their learning at all. The only time she could get them to act in a way that was disciplined and quiet and studious was story time. So she took this as a sign that she was destined to become a storyteller. And she knew a little bit about what storytelling was because US author and storyteller Bob Hartman, who wrote the Lion Storyteller Bible, had met with her at I think it was at a big Christian event here in the UK. So she'd seen his storytelling. She knew what that sort of thing was, and she decided that she was going to give up the teaching path and go down that route and become a storyteller. And she contacted me to ask for my help setting up this as a business, knowing that I was into sales and marketing. And I agreed to do so only on the condition that I could help and do some of the storytelling as well. So we went into this thinking very much that storytelling for schools was a lot like theatre in schools. And here in the UK, we have a phrase called theatre in education, shortened to TIE. And those groups, TIE groups, are the kind that will go into a school, maybe perform a piece of Shakespeare or a piece of their own writing, a pantomime or something. And the children will enjoy that like they would a theatre production if they'd been to an actual theatre. And so we thought we would do this, and we were going to be doing it completely voluntary. My friend, she didn't need to be earning anything from this. She had a husband in a very good job, so she was hoping to do this just for fun. I was looking to do it just for fun as well. But while we were going in and we were putting on all of these plays, a couple of interesting things happened. First of all, we were calling ourselves storytellers because that's what Bob Hartman had called himself. And we had a bit of mentoring from Bob as well. He very kindly came and met with us and really took us as his apprentices. And we discovered that actually storytelling isn't the same as theatre, because in theatre you go in with a script, and storytelling is not the same. Storytelling is totally devoid of any written word in many, many cases. In fact, 90% of the time, maybe even 99% of the time, probably actually 99.999% of the time, there will not be any written word associated with what you are doing as a storyteller. You can probably tell that this, for instance, is not scripted. This is me just riffing. So we thought, okay, well, let's try that with children instead. And the difference was phenomenal. It went from being the sort of experience where we were opening up a world for the children to peer into, like peering in through a window in the fourth wall, to actually opening up a world that was inside their heads. It was no longer them watching us. It was us watching them as they were creating these worlds. And from that moment, when we went into schools and used this new art, or for us it was new, for human beings it was something like 30,000 years old, but you know, we thought we'd just discovered this.
That's true.
Kids were responding in so much more of an engaged way. They were starting to bring us stories that they had written down. They were inspired to actually start writing and bring us these stories in their break times without us telling them to, without the teachers telling them to. This was absolutely autonomous. They would, at the end of the story, they would come up to us and they would be really keen to find out if it was a true story and maybe the history behind it, the science behind it. If there was any science behind it, they'd want to know more about those particular principles. And again, this was completely autonomous. And after about 3 or 4 months of doing this voluntarily, we went into RAF Lakenheath's elementary school, which is a massive American school on a US airbase here in the UK. Again, we were just going in there to be doing a single voluntary performance. But my business partner had to duck out of the meeting because she had a bit of a tummy upset. So I was left all on my own. Someone who's just got this new passion for storytelling, who had a bit of a history in sales, in a room with a principal and a librarian of this nice big American school. And I absolutely accidentally went from offering this free performance to being contracted to have a 5-week artist in residency program working with all 900 children in that school over those 5 weeks, literally within the space of about 20 minutes. And we kind of had to give up our day jobs from there and devote everything to storytelling.
I think that's such an interesting story. And when we spoke earlier, you talked to me and you alluded about it just now, that storytelling is one of the oldest arts that we have. And you mentioned Roald Dahl. and talked about his stories. And since so many of our listeners and their children are going to be familiar with this author, maybe you can kind of bring that connection,
Sure.
to because I had never heard of this connection before.
Oh, okay. So the connection that you alluded to in your
Yes.
introduction is that I represented the Roald Dahl Story Company on ITV,
Yes.
one of the television networks here in the UK. And the Roald Dahl Story Company is the name of his estate. So this was representing his family, basically, which for me was a huge honor. So it's kind of amusing that one of the reasons I ended up in that position is because a few years before, I got asked by BAFTA, the awards company for TV and the arts here in the UK, to do a little bit of storytelling for a children's party they were throwing, an event that they were holding to celebrate the release of the new BFG film. And they wanted me to go in and tell some of Roald Dahl's stories. And I had to say to them, if you want me to tell someone else's stories, an author's stories, you will need to pay for the copyright on them.
Right.
Their intellectual property. So yes, my fee for being a storyteller and coming to you is this amount.
Right.
If you want me to tell Roald Dahl stories, it's going to be over twice that.
Right.
And they immediately came back and said, okay, we didn't quite realize this intellectual property made such a difference.
Right.
So my response was, how about I tell some of the stories that inspired Roald Dahl?
That's what I was talking about. Yes.
Yeah, because Roald Dahl and all storytellers, whether you are an author, whether you are a filmmaker, you do not work in a vacuum. Every single story that is ever told has got a little bit of history in it. So this might be a fictional story. It can sometimes be a true story. But in many, many cases, especially when it's a writer like Roald Dahl, and Disney, of course, is another very popular one, these are going to be stories that come from a folk tradition somewhere. And for Roald Dahl, stories were absolutely important to him. If you read his biography, you'll see in there that as a youngster, he loved getting told stories by his mum, so much that he was still referring to those stories in the letters that he and his mum exchanged when he was in boarding school. So, a good 4 or 5 years later. And he was collecting more stories too. So whenever he discovered something new, or when he discovered another version of a story that his mum had told him, he would send that back to her. So the stories that he got from his mum were mostly the Norwegian folk tales. He might discover an English variant of one of those folk tales, and he would pass it back to her. So his mind was awash with all of these different stories. And what I did for BAFTA was I told some of those Norwegian folk tales. And again, coming back to what I was saying earlier about how children, when you're storytelling with them, they just have so much, they bring so much more of a response to it than if you ever try doing just straight drama with them. They were coming up to me afterwards and they were spotting all of the similarities between the stories of Norwegian folklore and Roald Dahl's books. So they would pick out the bits that were similar in Matilda or BFG or even Fantastic Mr. Fox. And the Roald Dahl Story Museum caught wind of this, and they asked me to essentially replicate the program in the town of Great Missenden, where Roald Dahl was, where he lived for most of his later life. And it was going to be a story walk. So we would start at the museum and we would take a walk up through Angling Spring Wood, which was right next door to where Roald Dahl used to live and write. And we'd tell some of these stories. The children would explore, again, some of the crossovers between the stories and Dahl's work. And then we'd end the walk back at the museum. And this had only been going for, I think, less than a year, actually, when ITV caught wind of it. And it ended up being number 75 in the top 100 favourite walks of
Oh,
the UK
wow.
within only 6 months or so of existing.
Wow.
So again, that
What a
was quite an
compliment.
honour.
What a
And
compliment.
ITV wanted me to go on to their
Yeah.
programme to talk about it.
What a compliment to you. I'm sure that listeners are hearing us. They're saying, "Oh, this is wonderful, and I'm always interested in stories. But how is this going to help me again? How is this going to make a difference to my child?" And so I want to make sure we get some of the finer points here out, because we have so many teachers and so many parents who are not trained, are trying to work with their kids at home, and many of these kids have challenges. And aside from those challenges, the virtual learning has added one more layer of challenge to us all. And so, can you kind of address, before we get into a specific story, which I am going to ask you about, can you kind of talk a little bit to the specific ways that storytelling addresses some of these challenges that teachers are having to help them engage the students with their eyes, their ears, their bodies, their minds?
Sure. Well, I reckon every single one of your listeners, Judy, will be able to call to mind a story that they know and love, maybe their favorite film, their favorite TV show, their favorite book, or whatever. And if you started to quiz them on that story, they would know an awful lot. They'd be able to remember the names of characters, maybe even what those characters were wearing. They'd be able to remember what happens, where it happens, how long certain things take, that kind of thing. That is part of your evidence for the ability of story to really lodge itself in the mind and lodge loads of factual information, loads of process information in your mind, even if you weren't necessarily trying to get it there. You know, no one really, or few people, go out and try to learn every single line of their favorite film. You just pick it up, you absorb it when you watch your favorite film. It's exactly the same with any story that you share with your children. Once you start telling it in an engaging way, it will lodge inside their mind. They're already creating it from inside themselves. So any learning elements that are contained within that story are going to be inherent within them from the process of listening to the story.
And it's going to, and it reaches, I mean, I can just hear a math teacher saying, okay, that sounds great for social studies, but how am I supposed to do that for math?
Absolutely.
Or the gym teacher saying, I have the kids doing, jumping jacks, but I mean, how do I get a story around that? So there is a challenge here from their perspective, but I know that you have answers for that.
Oh, I do, yes. I do, because this is one of the things that really took off for us after we did our project with EU Lifelong Learning back in 2013 to 15, because those are exactly the same questions that teachers came to us with. And we started exploring, okay, well, how can you start to cover practically any subject through story? And we have told stories that helped children very quickly grasp decimal fractions, using number lines, counting in steps, counting forwards and backwards, obviously things like multiplication and division, scientific principles like mechanics and biology, evolution, etc. I mean, there are so many. Really. Any subject you give me, I think we could find a story for. It is certainly not just literacy and social studies, and the physical education side as well. I mean, in a way, that's the easiest one that you brought to us just there, because of course drama in itself is just a physical representation of a story. So if you have a story, let's just take a random one, Tortoise and the Hare, and you try and encourage your children to go as quickly as the hare or move in a way that's slow and thoughtful like the tortoise, the way they are thinking about their body there, the energy that they're expending. There's so much of a physical education activity right there.
Now, one of the stories that I listened to that you told it was a story about a man who told some very boring stories, and you kept saying they go on and on and on and on and on. But part of it was an action where you wanted the audience to participate. And you said, every time I knock on the door, I want you all to, there's a tradition that I don't say knock, knock, but you knock. And so you would say, I knock on the door, and you'd put your fist up, and everybody would do their knock, knock. And there was another one that I listened to where you were speaking to a live audience, and you made the announcement, I'm a storyteller. I want you, when you hear me say I'm a storyteller, get on with the story, you yell at me. Get on with the story. And so you were telling the story, and intermixed throughout the story, you would say, and I am a storyteller, and you'd hear the audience say, get on with the story. So that little process of engaging them, and that just those small actions, kept them listening and waiting for the appropriate time to be able to participate. And I thought that was awesome. And I'm assuming that this is one of the traditions, one of the elements or tools that you use when you're trying to engage the kids. It's to get them involved in the process.
Yeah, well, there are all sorts of different tools.
Right, I'm sure.
I've mentioned, you want to tell an engaging story, and I imagine you've got quite a few of your listeners going, yeah, but how do we do that? And the real key to it, in fact, I call it the key chain, really, because every other key skill of storytelling hangs on the engagement keychain. So, a lot of people say, oh, so-and-so's a good storyteller because they do all of the voices. That's a great skill, but it's only a key skill. It's not the keychain. You're looking for something that is going to engage regardless of your audience. And that is to remember that storytelling as an art is probably the most unique art in the world, because it must have an audience. The most important person in a storytelling exchange is the listener or the audience. Because unlike any other art form, everything that's being created in the course of storytelling is being created by the listener. The storyteller is just transmitting the story. Sometimes they may be making a story up on the spot, and I've been known to do that. Other people have been known to do that. But most of the time, like I said earlier, 99.9 etc. % of the time, the story has been passed on, perhaps from a tradition, perhaps from a book that you've read, or a book that you've written, and the story is in your head. So you're not actually having to create anything. It's being created by the listener. And that means that they have a completely important role in the story as it's coming into fruition. You are bouncing off them. We once did a performance for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, the largest arts festival in the UK, and they claim to be the largest one in the world as well. I don't know how true that is, but we went there with one of our storytelling productions, and the reviews said, I think probably the most perfect statement that I've heard, which is that it felt more like a conversation than a theatre show. Because that is exactly what storytelling is. It's a dialogue between the artist, performer, whatever you want to call them, and the audience. And a painter can paint a picture, slap it up on the wall. They can do it in a studio. They can do it in a park. They can do it on the moon. They don't have to have anyone with them. A writer as well. They've got a screen or a piece of paper in front of them. Most writers I know like to have a quiet space, or at least be away from distraction while they are working on their piece. A storyteller cannot do that. You cannot just tell a story to a screen, or even to a dictaphone, because the audience have such an essential role in the shape of that story. That's the engagement keychain. So once you've grasped that, then you realize that whoever it is in front of you is going to have an essential role in exactly how this story comes about. It doesn't matter if you use voices. It doesn't matter if you use pictures or puppets or props or anything like that. if you can see your audience or your listener, and you can work out what is engaging them, that particular individual in front of you, you can adapt your performance to meet whatever their needs are. So, it might be even a case of changing the story. So if they don't really appreciate a story like Little Red Riding Hood, for example, because it's too airy-fairy for them, well, then make it darker. Really focus on the threat that is there in the wolf. If they find a story like The Three Little Pigs to be too terrifying, then dial it back and put in a few more comedy elements, such as trying to count up the number of sticks and, trying to make them balance like you do with a deck of cards, and a little cough, it all falls down. I wonder what the wolf is going to do when he turns up. These are all sorts of things that you can do to make sure that your listener is the one who's in control of the story, and that's how maximum engagement is achieved.
And that can address the term I used before, the multimodal learning, kids who are on special have IEPs, who need to be more kinesthetically involved, kids that maybe are auditory learners, kids that are visual learners. You can certainly hold things up like puppets or signs or pictures. I was doing a little bit of reading, and one of the suggestions from another resource said that when you're storytelling, if kids have difficulty sitting quietly, tell them to get some paper and a crayon and pencil, and as you tell the story, have them begin to draw what they think the character might look like. Absolutely. And then they can show it, to everybody later, which I thought was a great idea. So we get, you, as you say, the audience has a great deal of input in the story. And I think you said to me when we were talking earlier, sometimes you don't like to use voices because you like the kids to kind of have in their own head what they think the voice should be. And in this case with the pictures, maybe with this particular story, you wouldn't do a lot of description about the character. You would kind of let the kids develop their own physical attributes of the character as they were drawing, and then share those. So
it's important to think as well that you're picking your method of storytelling, and you are picking your story for a purpose, especially when you're talking storytelling as an educational tool, because yes, there are children's books out there and they're often very beautifully illustrated.
Yes.
And that has an important role as well. It's an important, I often say that experience is the fuel of the imagination. I can't tell a story to a child about, say, a lion if they don't already have some basic awareness of what a lion might be, even if that is a cat with, a large cat with a very furry face if it's a male lion. So you have to allow children to pick up things from pictures, and even TV shows and computer games are good for this, for helping children grow the fuel that you can then use for their imagination. But the important art of storytelling, and where this can really sort of take that and run with it, is that you then allow the children to put their ownership over it, their investment, and it becomes intrinsic to them because they're all creating it from within. They are feeling the success that the heroes in these stories are having. So if a hero solves a problem in a story, they get that feeling too, because they've created the hero. And when the hero succeeds at solving a problem, they know exactly how that feels. So when they then go into a situation where you maybe give them, it could even be a test situation, and they see that exact same problem, they're no longer looking at it thinking, the first few times I did this, I didn't get it right, or I've got to really try very hard. Instead, their very first experience of that sort of problem is, that's what Hercules learned when he was talking with Chiron about such and such. So this is what I need to do here. And it just gives them a feeling that propels them through any difficulty.
One of the resources that we do want to talk about is your Epic Tales, and where you have so many free resources for teachers and parents to go if they're looking for some ideas. I thought this might be a good opportunity for you to give us a little bit of a hook, motivation to explore epic tales. Would you be willing to start us off on something that you can share?
Oh, you mean a story?
Story, yeah.
Magic hook, as you described.
Yeah.
I can give it a go.
Okay.
Well, would you like to know why we tell stories in the first place, Judy?
Absolutely.
I mean, you seem like the kind of person who's always seeking knowledge, so that seems a good place to start. Why do we actually tell stories in the first place? And the answer honestly comes from a long time ago, even before humans could speak, back when all of the animals were speaking. I mean, just between you and me, Judy, animals still speak now. It's just that humans do so much of the talking that they rarely get a word in edgeways, so they tend to end up coming across as a lot more silent. But back before humans were around to take the words away from them, the animals, they really loved talking. They had a society just like we have. The only thing was that they didn't have any stories. Because every single story in the world that ever was or ever would be was kept in the sky by the god of the sky, Neambe. And there was one creature in particular down on Earth who really didn't like this state of affairs, and that was a spider called Anansi. Have you heard of him?
No.
You haven't heard of Anansi?
I've heard of spiders, but not that one.
Well, to be honest, if you hadn't heard of spiders, I'd be a little bit worried.
Oh.
But yes, Anansi was a spider, and he really wanted to be able to tell stories. In particular, he wanted to tell stories about Anansi. You know, he was really keen to share the adventures that he'd been on. So right at the beginning of this story, he dressed up as best he could. You know, he put on his finest hat, and he ran to the top of the tallest tree in the jungle, and he called out, "Oh, great sky god Neambe, you are so amazing, you are so brilliant, we love you down here because you do fantastic things for us, like sharing the stories. Oh, we love it when you share the stories, Neambe, you're so brilliant." Now, you could see what he was doing there, couldn't you?
Oh, yes.
I can see it in your face here on Zoom. And of course, Neambe, being a sky god, was able to see through this little spider's plan straight away. So he said to him, "You cannot trick me, little spider. If you want the stories, you have to earn them. And to do that, you need to bring me the wasps with stings like fire." To which Anansi replied,
No.
"I'll get back to you." And ran back down the tree. Now, I'm guessing from your reaction there that you're not a keen wasp fan.
Not exactly my favorite people.
And imagine as well, and all of your listeners can do this, imagine as well if you were a spider, just think how much larger those wasps would be. So this was quite an unnerving proposition for Anansi. He was feeling quite depressed at this point because he really did want the stories. He had the passion there and the determination, but to collect the wasps with stings like fire, it was perhaps too great a challenge. And he went home and sat down at the table with all of his children playing around him, and he just couldn't think of how this could be done. Until he spotted one of his children drinking from a gourd. Now, in case you don't know what a gourd is, do you know what a gourd is?
Yes. I'm old enough to know what a gourd is.
Okay, well, for your younger listeners then, a gourd is basically a bottle. In Africa, where this story comes from, it's a bottle that's made out of a calabash fruit. And if you don't know what a calabash fruit is, think pumpkin, think squash.
I was just going to say it's Halloween. We have lots of
it's Halloween. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, that's the idea. So Anansi saw one of his kids drinking out from one of these gourds, one of these calabash fruit. and he had an idea. You see, inside Anansi's mind, he knew of a magic number that he liked to call pi. And the combination of that thought of his magic number and the sight of his child's gourd gave him an idea. And if you want to find out exactly what he did with that magic number and with that gourd, then you're in luck, because that is actually the story that we tell as part of our introduction to story-led learning at Epic Tales, which is the presentation that we do really to give teachers a head start on how to use this sort of practice in their classrooms. And at the moment, we are putting on these presentations over lunch, and that's lunchtime in EST, CST, and PT as well. So there's 3 different presentations that take place over a couple of days. And yeah, you can get a free ticket to one of those by going to epic-tales.com and sign up, and you will get to experience exactly how brilliant story-led learning is for helping children to grasp and master education really quickly, helping to raise their confidence too. And of course, it's delivered in such a fun way. Storytelling is an art. It is exciting and fun, and that means that children are a lot more relaxed in the classroom. And at a time like we're having now, with so much anxiety and so much uncertainty, there is nothing more important than helping your children to learn in a relaxed way. And if you can do that with a tool that is also proven to be one of the best methods for helping them learn anyway, why not go with that one?
I can't imagine a child hearing that story in math class and not remembering what pi is. You know, I can't imagine that happening. I know that one of your passions is helping people. You shared that with me the last time we spoke, that you get a great deal of satisfaction in mentoring others. Your Epic Tales is where people can go and get these stories, is free. It's out there for people to use. And I know that you're probably not going to mention this, but I'm going to mention that when teachers and mentors and parents go to this site and begin to take advantage of some of these resources you have, the stories that you've written or the techniques that they're learning from listening to your stories, you are giving this to them as a gift. And I know that you would be very grateful to them if they would make a donation to Epic Tales, because you are using all of the donating funds from the World Storytelling Cafe on Epic Tales, the performances. You're using it toward Epic Tales efforts to support parents and kids during the COVID-19. And obviously this process is costly, and anything that we can do to support you will help maintain it as a resource for people in years to come. Hopefully we won't ever go through this again.
Yes. Well, yes, it's very kind of you to mention. And if I can just add to it.
Yes.
One of the sort of areas of society that I think has been missed, even in the Western world, like you and I live in, are those who don't have access to the internet. And yes, we are producing free online stories every single week, every single week of UK term time. And those stories are all backed up with a podcast that teachers, educators and mentors and parents can go to learn exactly how to use each story for a whole raft of subjects, from literacy to numeracy, science, PE, you name it. However, there are going to be families out there for whom those resources just won't work, because they may not know what a podcast is, let alone have access to a device that will play one. They may not be able to stream a video from the internet. So one of the things that we are doing behind the scenes is we are working with city councils to produce written versions of our stories in packs with activities as well that go out through, well, in the UK we have food banks here, which I don't know if you have something.
Yeah, we have food banks.
Yeah, you have food banks.
Yeah.
So these resources are put there for the families who are using those food banks who maybe don't have access to online resources to take away and still have this fantastic learning experience with their children. And of course, it's not just a learning experience, because storytelling is a communicative art. It's also relationship building. If you're using this sort of method as a parent, let alone as a teacher, you are going to find yourself getting closer to your children, because it's all about forming a connection, a bond between you.
Before we close, I want to just reiterate some of the very important components of storytelling that you've kind of interspersed throughout the discussion here, so that people can kind of bring it together and keep it in mind if they want to do some storytelling. And please add in, correct what I'm saying, but I'm gathering that interaction from the audience, from your students, is so important. It's just not passive listening. It's having them be engaged and helping to create the story. And you made a list of questions like, what kind of sounds do you think the character is making? And what do you think the character looks like? And what kind of clothes do you think he's wearing? And you can get different answers from different children. Each one creating, each one will just, I'm saying that because sometimes we get one answer and we stop, but if we keep going, we're going to get different answers from different kids. And so they're creating a different visual of the character, but it's the same, under the same umbrella of the story.
Right.
What kind of sounds do they make? You mentioned to me, try and use a little humor. You were talking before, try and use a little humor in your story and get them laughing, and then maybe ask them, what was so funny and what did you like about that? And so that the story develops kind of as a result of some of the information the kids give you. And I didn't write this down here, but when we were talking, you said sometimes if you get a response from the child, one child or maybe more than one child, that you weren't expecting, you can tweak your story and kind of incorporate it into the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, participation doesn't have to be asking everyone to make a sound effect, or asking a child to put on a hat and pretend to be a witch, or anything like that. Things like laughter are participation. Things like gasps, that's participation too. And those are all signs that your listeners are creating the story with you. They are helping to create the atmosphere. And I think the passivity of an audience that you sort of mentioned, I'm not sure you can even have that, because if you are watching your audience and just checking for their responses and checking their level of engagement, then they won't be able to be passive, because they're going to be moved by the emotions that your story holds. They're going to be surprised when you have surprises for them. They're going to be with you on this journey. They're certainly not going to be passive.
Well, it's like the knock knock that you did in your story before. You can have the kids participate in that particular sound effect, or you could ask them what sound effect they think might be happening. And
those sorts of techniques, I mean, I personally, in the videos that you saw there, I was addressing very, very large groups.
Yes, I know.
Those are good techniques for using with really large audiences like that. But you mentioned right at the start about how a lot of teaching and tutoring is being done online.
Yes.
Those are also really, really good techniques for screen learning, because if you're just stood in front of an audience actually you hardly need to use any engagement techniques at all, because you've got your audience right there. You can see them, you can get a good sense from their body language, just how well engaged they are. So much more difficult to do that through a conversation like we're having now. So that's why when you are doing online storytelling or even just online teaching, it's so much more important to have this bounce back every few seconds, at least once a minute, to check where they are in the story, to get them to give a little bit of an input. You know, it might be, what color is Anansi's hat? It might be, which tree do you think we should climb? Can you climb it with me? You know, getting them to do certain actions with you. Just little ways like that to make sure that it is definitely a conversation that's going backwards and forwards.
Chip, thank you so much for your time today. This has been one of the most fun podcasts, and I've learned so much. And I want to thank our mentors for listening. I hope they will check out the links that are on the podcast and go to the resources that you're making available to them. Why don't you give them the Epic Tales link one more time?
Yeah, sure. Well, if you go to epic-tales.com, that's where you can book a free ticket to one of our lunchtime training sessions. And if you then stick around on the website, you'll be able to find all of the free stories that we put out every week with that podcast, telling you exactly, giving you some ideas anyway of exactly how to use them. I'm sure you will have many more yourself.
Thank you again. Thank you, mentors, for being with us at our episode before the holidays. We're going to be taking a break now, and we will see you again very soon. Stay safe, be well, and keep connected. Thank you. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast, so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners, so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.